Welcome to tonight's episode of Crochet Storytime with Charlie. And on tonight's episode, there are places that people abandon, and then there are some places that seem to remember the people that once lived there. Hidden among the lonely grasslands of North Dakota is the remains of a town called Sims. More than a century ago, over 1,000 people called this place home. Coal miners worked nearby, family filled its houses, trains passed through, and on Sundays, worshippers gathered together on the prairie. But then people began to disappear. The mines faded, the houses vanished, and the population collapsed, and even the post office closed its doors. Today, Sims is considered a ghost town, but according to local legend, the town isn't completely empty. Because inside the old parsonage beside the church, people have reported footsteps when no one was there. Windows supposedly opened and closed by themselves, and an organ was heard playing when no one was touching the keys. And on quiet evenings, some claim to have seen a figure of a woman dressed in gray watching from the window. Her name may have been Bertha, but today she is simply remembered as the Lady in Gray. Now, this story begins in Morton County, North Dakota. Around 1880, the North Pacific Railroad established the loop in this area near a coal operation known as Bly's Mine. In 1883, the settlement was surveyed and renamed Sims, and almost immediately the town began growing. Mining brought workers, and a brickyard provided additional employment. Families soon followed, businesses appeared, and only within a year, Sims reportedly had a population of more than 1,000 people. For a small prairie community in the 1880s, Sims appeared to have a promising future, but that future disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Only within 6 years, the population had reportedly fallen to around 400, and by the 1910 census, only 86 people remained. Over the following decades, Sims slowly vanished. Families moved away, buildings disappeared, businesses closed, and finally in 1947, the post office officially shut its doors. The town had become that was once home to more than 1,000 people was essentially gone, but everything had not disappeared. Standing around among the rolling prairie was a little Lutheran church, and beside it, the parsonage. The Scandinavian Lutheran Church congregation at Sims traces its beginning back to the early 1880s. The first church was constructed in 1884, and the congregation became one of the oldest Lutheran congregations west of the Missouri River. But before worshippers had a proper church available to them, services were held inside the parsonage, and the conditions weren't exactly comfortable. The pastor lived downstairs, and churchgoers had to climb a winding staircase into a cramped upper room that was little more than an attic. There wasn't enough space for proper church furniture, so the congregation improvised. According to local accounts, livestock troughs were carried into the building, turned over, and used as makeshift benches or kneeling rails. And then there was still not enough room. Some people reportedly stood the entire service. Eventually, a proper church building gave the congregation more room, and remarkably, while everything surrounding it disappeared, the church survived. Services continued, and beside that church stood the parsonage. And during the early 20th century, a young woman would die inside it. Her death would become the beginning of one of North Dakota's most enduring ghost stories. And sometime between 1916 and 1918, Reverend L. D. Dortle lived in the Sims parsonage with his wife. Her name was Bertha. She was only 26 years old, and Bertha reportedly served the church as the organist. But during the family's time in Sims, she became seriously ill. Her illness lingered, and eventually Bertha died inside the parsonage. Reverend Dortle later remarried. Eventually, he and his new wife left Sims, and Dortle went to serve another church in Larimore. For most people, that's where Bertha's story should have ended. But according to legend, something remained inside that house. And before long, people would begin noticing it. People staying in the parsonage would begin reporting strange occurrences. Footsteps were supposedly heard moving through the rooms and climbing the stairs. Windows reportedly opened and closed without anyone touching them. And then there was the music. Some people claim they could hear the organ being played, except eventually there was no organ. Yet the mysterious music was still reportedly heard. Then came the sightings of something even more disturbing. A shape, a woman, a figure dressed in gray. People began calling her the Lady in Gray. But strangely, Bertha's supposed spirit didn't always behave like something from a horror movie. One story tells a young woman who was boarding in a room upstairs, and during the night while she was sleeping, she felt someone place an extra blanket over her. She apparently thought nothing of it, and perhaps someone had just noticed the temperature dropping and quietly covered her. But then the following morning, she discovered something strange. Nobody had gone upstairs during the night. So who put the blanket over her? For believers in the legend, there was only one answer. That was Bertha. Now, by the 1930s, Pastor Carl Nelson and his wife Olga were also living in the parsonage, and Olga reportedly encountered a strange presence herself. She claimed she saw a gray shape upstairs, and on another occasion, Olga reportedly watched the handle of the water pump begin moving up and down on its own. Yet surprisingly, she didn't describe the spirit as evil. She considered the presence friendly, but not apparently everyone was comfortable. In 1938, the strange activity became serious enough for the church that it reportedly contacted the district officials about supernatural happenings inside and around the parsonage. Other accounts claim that when the old church records were translated from Norwegian into English, letters were discovered discussing paranormal activity and difficulties keeping the pastors in the residence. Whether every detail from those stories can be independently verified, that's another question. But the legend is clearly becoming part of Sims, and the living population continued disappearing, but Bertha's story remained. Sometime during the 1940s, the parsonage reportedly served its final resident pastor. The other people continued living there for a time, but by 1984, the occupants closed the doors for good. The parsonage stood empty, and the years weren't kind to it. The building slowly deteriorated, but the members of the Sims Church did not want to lose that important piece of history. Working with Preservation North Dakota, volunteers began restoring the building. Thousands of volunteer hours were eventually poured into saving the parsonage, with the major restoration work completed in 2007. Then something remarkable happened. In 2008, First Lady Laura Bush visited the Sims parsonage through her involvement with Save America's Treasures program. North Dakota was reportedly her last state that she visited through the program, and she personally selected the Sims parsonage, reportedly saying, "I have saved the best for last." But while volunteers were restoring the building, apparently they weren't the only ones spending time there. During one summer renovation weekend, volunteers gathered at Sims to work on the property, and some camped outside on the grounds. But that night, someone reported seeing a mysterious woman, but not that. They heard something. Well, a repetitive thumping sound that came from inside the house. Dale Bentley of Preservation North Dakota described the noise as sounding like someone walking. Something distinct was coming from inside that house. But the house was supposed to be empty. Could it have been the building settling, an animal, the wind? Certainly. Old houses make strange noises. But when you're camping outside of a parsonage that has been associated with a ghost for generations and you hear footsteps coming inside, you're not going to convince yourself it's just the wind. The locals around Sims and nearby Almont have also shared stories of the Lady in Gray. One account describes of an Almont resident who claimed people have seen a mysterious figure walking around the church grounds at dusk. But then she reportedly admitting something more personal. While traveling on an early morning mail route, she looked toward the parsonage, seeing something moving upstairs. A curtain was pulled back, and standing in the window was the lady in gray. Can you imagine seeing that? The prairie is still dark, and almost an entire town that's abandoned, and then just the church sitting slightly beside the road, and then inside a house that's supposed to be empty, there's someone watching you through an upstairs window. Now, Sims contains another strange reminder of the sound's forgotten past. It's a small bridge that still stands there, but today it doesn't really go anywhere. There's no normal approaches leading to it, there's no flowing creek beneath it. It's just simply sitting there. A bridge waiting for pedestrians who may never return. Nearby stands one of the last abandoned houses remaining in Sims: the church, the parsonage, the abandoned house, the bridge to nowhere, all pieces of a community that once contained thousands of lives, and now almost nothing. Now, what makes the story of the Lady in Grey is so haunting is that stories usually involving one abandoned house or an old cemetery or an old forgotten hotel, but Sims is completely different. There is everything gone. Just the church, just the parsonage, and just the bridge, and just the Lady in Grey. What do you think? Do you think it's just created around an old house? Or could Bertha still be wandering the parsonage more than a century after her death? Tell me what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed more stories like this, let me know. Please give me your suggestions for next week's episodes. And as always, I want to thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and share, and have a wonderful night.